My daughter-in-law called me a fat pig at her wedding. Then her dad saw the millionaire who bought his company. It sounds like the kind of headline you'd scroll past on social media, doesn't it? But that was my reality the day I walked into my only son's wedding and became the subject of whispers that changed everything. My name is Margaret Hale, born in 1965 in a small town outside Dallas. Back in my 30s, after years of raising a family and helping my husband chase his crazy little dream, I discovered that success can come quietly without flashing lights or fancy cars. I felt invisible most of my life, and for a while I believed that was safety. But then something happened that reminded me silence doesn't mean weakness. It means power, waiting for the right moment. Today, at 60, I'm finally telling this story because silence shouldn't always be mistaken for surrender. If you're listening, drop your location below. And don't forget to share what family means to you. The wedding was everything I thought it would be: lavish, loud, and staged for social media. My son Daniel looked handsome, nervous, and too eager to please. His bride, Clara Reynolds, was stunning in a lace gown that sparkled every time she turned. I stood at the back, wearing a soft blue dress that hid the extra pounds age had kindly gifted me. I didn't want to steal anyone's spotlight. I never did. Clara's side of the family filled most of the hall. Her father, Richard Reynolds, owned a company once famous for luxury home goods, Reynolds Holdings. I'd read about him years ago when his business was struggling. Back then, no one knew who had quietly bought it out. No one, except me. I'd done it. 3 years ago, through a private investment group, I purchased Reynolds Holdings under an alias company my late husband and I had created before he died. It wasn't out of spite. It was business. Richard had talent, but was drowning in bad deals and ego. Buying him out was the smartest move for both of us, though he'd never admit it. When I arrived at the wedding, Clara gave me the kind of smile that looks polite from afar but cuts like glass up close. I had never been her favorite person. From the first day we met, I could tell she measured people by how much they could serve her image, and I was not image material. During the dinner, when the guests were laughing and the champagne was flowing, Clara decided to toast the family. She thanked her father for his legacy and the grace he passed down, thanked her bridesmaids for making everything perfect, and then turned her attention toward me. And of course, she said with a bright performative smile, to my new mother-in-law, who, well, is certainly comfortable with herself. Cheers to confidence at any size. The crowd gave an awkward laugh, unsure whether to join in. My face burned. I forced a smile. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she added in a lower voice, but loud enough for those nearby to hear, I mean, really, Daniel's so fit. It's almost funny how genes skip a generation. That's when I heard someone at the next table whisper, did she just call her a pig? It wasn't rage that hit me. It was something heavier, a slow, deliberate ache. I stared at my plate and tried to breathe. Daniel noticed, his eyes flickering between me and Clara, but he didn't say a word. That silence hurt most. I excused myself, walked to the restroom, and stared at my reflection. For a moment, I saw what she saw. A soft body, tired eyes, gray hair pulled too tightly. But then I remembered something my husband, William, used to tell me before he passed. Maggie, he'd say, the loudest people usually have the weakest roots. I returned to my seat, calm and composed, though my heart was still trembling. The evening carried on until the father-daughter dance. Richard took the microphone, proud and smiling, giving a speech about legacy and hard work. Then his gaze landed on me just for a second, and his face changed. He blinked twice, his smile faltered, and a spark of recognition flashed in his eye. When the dance ended, he approached me, his steps slow and uncertain. Margaret Hale, he asked quietly. I nodded, sipping my wine. It's been a while, Richard. He tilted my head and smiled softly. Under a different name, yes. The color drained from his face. You're joking. He stood frozen, trying to process the reality that the quiet, middle-aged woman his daughter just humiliated was the reason his family still lived in their mansion. I could almost see the shame crawl up his neck. "Does Clara know?" he asked finally. "No, and I'd like to keep it that way, at least for now. But secrets have a funny way of slipping through the cracks, especially at weddings filled with alcohol and gossip." Later that night, as the music blared and the guests danced, I caught Richard whispering to his wife, Helen. Her expression morphed from confusion to shock. Then she leaned over to Clara and murmured something. Clara's eyes widened, and her lips parted in disbelief. She turned to stare at me, her expression a mix of fear and outrage. I could almost hear her thoughts spinning. She walked over with her glass still in hand. "So," she said, forcing a laugh, "you're telling me you own my father's company?" I stayed seated, my voice calm. "Technically, I saved it. Ownership is just paperwork." Her laughter was brittle. "Wow. So the woman I called, well, at my wedding is the reason I still have a family name." I looked her in the eye. "Life's funny that way." She didn't take that well. She stormed off, dragging Daniel behind her. I could see them arguing across the hall. He looked torn, confused. I didn't blame him. He'd grown up thinking his parents were average middle-class people who saved coupons and worried about bills. He never knew about the patents, the investments, the quiet empire William and I built from a cell phone battery prototype we'd sold to a global tech firm decades ago. We hid it deliberately. We wanted Daniel to work hard, to become his own man. Money changes people, and not always for the better. So we kept our fortune tucked away, funding scholarships and charities anonymously, while living simply. By the time the wedding was over, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Guests were whispering, eyes flicking toward me as I walked past. The girl who mocked me had just discovered that appearances don't tell stories. They hide them. I went home that night and sat by the window, still wearing my blue dress, watching the city lights flicker below. I could hear William's voice in my head. "Maggie, the truth always finds the proud." The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Daniel called, sounding shaken. "Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this? About the company, about the money?" "Because I wanted you to earn your life, not inherit mine," I said. "Sweetheart, I didn't plan anything. Your wife did the talking last night." There was silence on the line. "She wants to meet," he said finally. I agreed, though my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. That wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was the spark that would light a storm I never saw coming. Because in trying to humiliate me, Clara had exposed the one secret I'd built my life protecting. And once money enters a marriage built on pretense, love becomes a negotiation. But I had no idea then just how far she would go to claim what she thought was hers. The morning after that uneasy phone call, I met Clara and Daniel at a small cafe downtown. The air between us was heavy before we even said a word. Clara sat upright, dressed sharply, her makeup perfect but her smile rehearsed. Daniel looked exhausted, like he'd been trying to hold peace between two storms. I ordered tea, mostly to keep my hands busy. Clara started talking before I even lifted my cup. "Mrs. Hale, I just want to understand something," she said in that brittle tone people use when they're already angry. "You mean to tell me that all this time you've been rich? Like really rich?" I smiled faintly. "Comfortable, yes, but being rich is a matter of perspective." She leaned forward. "Perspective? You own my father's company." "Own," I corrected gently, "is a word you might want to think about differently. Your father still manages it. I simply made sure it didn't collapse." Her lips tightened. "And you never told Daniel?" I looked at my son. He was raised to be his own man. I didn't want him to live in anyone's shadow. Not even mine. Clara scoffed. "That's convenient. Meanwhile, my family's been scraping to maintain everything. You could have said something that helped us." I tilted my head. "I already did. The purchase of Reynolds Holdings was a form of help. It kept your father's name off bankruptcy papers. The way her eyes flickered told me she hadn't known that part. Daniel was silent, processing, as if he'd just realized his mother wasn't the simple woman he thought I was. I could feel the wall growing between them, and it hurt. That afternoon, when I got home, I thought it was over. A rough conversation, yes, but one we could all move past. I was wrong. A week later, a man knocked on my door. A private investigator. He introduced himself as Mr. Coleman and handed me an envelope. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I've been hired by Mrs. Clara Hale Reynolds to verify your holdings and business affiliation." I remember standing there, utterly still. Clara had actually hired someone to dig into my life. I took the envelope, thanked him, and shut the door quietly. Inside were photographs, corporate records, and notes tracing back to the investment firms that managed my account. She'd been thorough, too thorough. Thorough. That evening, I called Daniel. "Your wife hired someone to investigate me," I said plainly. He sighed, sounding defeated. "I told her not to." "Mom, she's scared. She doesn't understand why you'd keep something like that secret." "Daniel," I said softly, "fear doesn't excuse intrusion." I could tell he agreed. But love makes people defend what they shouldn't. Days passed and rumors began to swirl. Small-town journalists started asking about a mysterious investor behind Reynolds Holdings. Someone had leaked the story. Clara's family name started reappearing in business columns, not for weddings, but for investigations. Then came the letter from the Federal Financial Bureau, asking to verify the legitimacy of my company's overseas account. That's when I knew this had gone beyond curiosity. Clara wasn't just digging. She was trying to corner me. I decided to act before anyone else did. I called an old friend, George Latham, a financial consultant who'd handled discrete matters for me and my husband for years. We met at his office. "She's reckless," George said after skimming the papers, "but she's stirred up just enough noise to attract attention. If the FFB starts looking, they'll find nothing illegal. But it'll take time and you'll be dragged through mud." I folded my hands, feeling the ache of age and disappointment. "Then I'll need to learn everything about her and her family too." "You always were strategic, Maggie." That evening, I began my quiet investigation. Within a week, I knew more about the Reynolds family than they likely knew about themselves. Their mansion was mortgaged to the brim. The luxury vehicles were leased. Their business accounts had been propped up by loans I had unknowingly guaranteed through my acquisition of the company. And Clara, well, her designer wardrobe and influencer lifestyle were mostly funded through credit. She'd been desperate to marry into something stable. Daniel wasn't her husband. He was her lifeboat. I remember sitting alone that night, reading through the documents, feeling both sadness and relief. Sadness that my son had married into deceit, and relief that I finally understood what game I was playing. When Daniel called that night, his voice was tense. "Mom, Clara's upset again. She thinks you're trying to destroy her family." "Destroy?" I repeated softly. "I saved them." She filed an anonymous report with the FFB. For the first time, I couldn't find words. My son's wife had actually reported me to the authorities. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from disbelief at how greed could blind a person. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer and turned over every document I had, making my financial dealings transparent. It took weeks, but the agency eventually cleared me of any wrongdoing. Still, the damage was done. Whispers lingered, and Clara's suspicions turned into open hostility. She'd visit me occasionally, always pretending civility while probing for more information. "You must have quite the inheritance," she said once over tea, her tone laced with envy. "I mean, Daniel deserves to know how much of it he's entitled to, right?" I looked at her steadily. "Entitlement is earned through love and loyalty, not bloodlines." Her smile faltered. By then, I knew she'd reached her breaking point. I'd seen it before in business rivals, in desperate men who'd lost too much. That mix of greed and panic makes people dangerous. One afternoon, I received a call from George. "Maggie, we've got a problem," he said grimly. "A journalist preparing to publish a piece suggesting your acquisition of Reynolds Holdings was insider trading. The source is anonymous, but I already knew who it was." The following weekend, I invited Clara and Daniel to dinner. It was time to bring everything into the light. We sat around the table, the air thick with tension. I waited until the food was served before speaking. "Clara," I began gently, "you've been busy." Her fork paused midair. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "Private investigators, anonymous reports, press leaks. You've turned curiosity into warfare." "Clara, tell me that's not true." She looked at me, defiant but nervous. "I had to protect us. Your mother's secrets could destroy this family." I leaned back. "The only thing destroying this family is your obsession with what's in my bank account." Daniel rubbed his temples, whispering, "Oh God." "Clara," her facade cracked then. She stood up, voice trembling with rage. "You've been manipulating us from the start. You wanted me to look like the villain." I didn't rise to her level. "No, Clara, you did that all by yourself." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door. Daniel followed her, torn between anger and pity. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the empty chair. That night, I realized something simple but painful. Money doesn't reveal character. It magnifies it. Clara had shown me hers. Still, I wasn't done, because what she didn't know yet was that I intended to end this, once and for all, on my own terms. The next morning, I called George again. "Prepare a settlement," I said. $5 million, but she walks away. Permanently. He was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" "Because peace, George, is more expensive than money, but it's worth paying for." I hung up, staring out the window as the sun rose. My reflection looked tired but steady. The game she started was nearly over, and for once I didn't feel invisible anymore. A week after that tense dinner, I asked Clara to meet me one last time. I chose a quiet restaurant by the river, somewhere neutral where emotions couldn't feed off an audience. She arrived 20 minutes late, looking both angry and uncertain. I could tell she wasn't sure whether to expect a truce or a trap. "Clara," I said softly, "thank you for coming." She didn't sit right away. "You said it was important," she replied sharply. "So what is it this time? Another lecture about morals?" I smiled faintly. "No, just closure." I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were 2 documents and a check. She looked at it, then back at me. "What's this?" "You sign the agreement, and in exchange, you withdraw your complaints, stop the investigations, and leave my son's life permanently." "You've already caused enough pain, Clara. Take the money, start over, and let us breathe." For a moment I thought she might throw it back in my face. But greed is a predictable beast. It always hesitates before rejecting abundance. Her eyes flickered, her jaw clenched, and I could almost see the war inside her. "I loved Daniel," she said finally, voice breaking slightly. "Maybe once," I said gently, "but love built on expectation is a house without a foundation." "You married him thinking you'd found security, not partnership." Tears welled in her eyes, but she looked away quickly, masking them with pride. "You're just trying to win," she muttered. I shook my head. "No, Clara, I stopped playing the moment you turned this into a battlefield. I'm just closing the gates." She stared at the check again, her fingers twitching. After a long silence, she signed the papers. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Maybe," I said, "but not as much as I'd regret losing my son completely." She left without another word. I sat there for a while, listening to the soft hum of the river outside. There was no victory in me, only relief, like finally setting down a burden I didn't realize I'd been carrying. When I got home, I found Daniel waiting on my porch. He looked drained. "She told me everything," he said softly. I nodded. "I thought she would. She took the money. I know, they just need an ending." We sat in silence for a long while. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain, and the wind chimes William had built years ago sang faintly from the porch beam. "Mom," Daniel whispered, "I don't even know what to say. Everything feels so fake. My marriage, the way I saw you, the lies she told." I touched his hand gently. "It's okay to feel lost, but being lost is sometimes how we find truth. And no matter what happens, I'll always choose love over resentment." For the first time in weeks, he let out a quiet laugh. "You sound like Dad." I laughed too, though tears blurred my vision. He'd probably be making pancakes right now and telling us both to stop overthinking. After that night, something between us began to heal. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow kind of healing that comes with honesty and time. The few months passed. The investigations were withdrawn. The articles stopped, and life gradually quieted. I sold my penthouse in the city, packed my things, and moved to a smaller home in Santa Fe, a place William had always loved. There, I started the Hale Foundation, a scholarship fund for young engineers who wanted to build things that mattered. It was my way of honoring William's spirit and reclaiming the meaning behind our fortune. I spent my mornings walking along the desert trails, feeling the sun warm my skin, and my evenings reading letters from students who'd received grants from the foundation. Each letter reminded me that money could wound, but it could also heal if placed in the right hands. Daniel visited often. He'd started teaching design at a community college, something that surprised me but made me proud. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, he said, "Mom, you know, I used to think success meant having everything, but you taught me it's about knowing when enough is enough." Guess I had to go through some storms to understand his wisdom. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Storms have a way of washing the dirt off what's real. He looked at me, eyes soft. "Do you ever think about Clara?" "Sometimes," I admit. "Not with anger though, just gratitude in a strange way." She reminded me that silence can be mistaken for weakness, but when used right, silence is strength in disguise. For the first time in a long while, I felt light, not rich, not powerful, just human. Later that night, I sat by the window and thought about everything that had happened: the humiliation, the investigations, the heartbreak, and the healing. Life has a way of circling back. I realized sometimes the people who hurt us are the same ones who unknowingly set us free. I thought about Clara and hoped she found her own kind of peace wherever she was. I thought about William, imagining him smiling somewhere above, probably teasing me for taking so long to learn what he always knew, that dignity and compassion outlive wealth. Before bed, I wrote a letter to the foundation's board, instructing them to double the annual scholarship amount. "Let kindness multiply," I wrote. "Let it be the quiet inheritance that outlasts money." The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window, warm and gentle. I made myself coffee, watched the sky blush pink over the desert, and whispered, "Thank you, life, for the endings that became beginnings." Because in the end, what started as a moment of public humiliation had turned into something much greater, a reminder that no insult, no betrayal, no lie can define who we are if we refuse to surrender our grace. I wasn't just the woman my daughter-in-law mocked at her wedding anymore. I was the woman who chose peace over pride and truth over appearances. And that, I realized, was the wealth I'd been protecting all along. Moral lesson: true strength isn't in silence born of fear,
but in silence, guided by wisdom. Sometimes, the world confuses humility with weakness, and kindness with surrender, but grace is a power far deeper than vengeance. When you stand firm in quiet integrity, life has a way of revealing the truth on your behalf. Money can build empires, but character sustains them. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into peace. You've got this no matter who tries to define your worth. Remember that dignity, compassion, and self-respect will always be the richest inheritance you can leave behind.